He was a lion in battle. He was a servant of God. He was the father of his nation. He guided his people into the modern world. His name was Abdulaziz. In 1901, 60 armed men set out in secret across the desert. They were led by Abdulaziz bin Abdul Rahman al Saud. His aim was to capture Riyadh and unify the country. It was, he felt, his destiny. He was 26 years old. 10 years before, Abdulaziz and his family had left Riyadh and gone into exile. Now his target was the Rashidi governor Ajlan's headquarters, the Mazmak fort in the middle of Riyadh. Ajlan slept there each night for protection. Leaving most of his followers outside, Abdulaziz crept into the town with just a few companions. This was his second attempt to take the fort. 6 months before, he had besieged it for 4 months. Concealed in the house opposite, Abdulaziz and his men waited for sunrise, when Ajlan would leave the fort to go home. At last, Ajlan's horses were brought out. Abdulaziz attacked Ajlan, who fled into the fort, and bin Jilwi killed him inside. With just 40 men, Abdulaziz had defeated twice that number, captured the fort, and regained Riyadh. The Al Saud had returned. It was January 1902. Abdulaziz's victory meant the return of a dynasty which had dominated the heart of Arabia for long years before. More than 200 years ago, the Al Saud held court here in Diriyah, the capital of the first Saudi state. Here they patronized a religious reformer, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab. Their reform movement revolutionized Arabia. The movement was based on an absolute commitment to the Quran and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad. the Al Saud rulers were called Imam by their people.
We're not calling for a new creed, and Mohammed bin Abdul Wahhab brought nothing new. Our creed is the creed of our Muslim forefathers.
But by 1891, the second Saudi state, which had dominated most of Arabia for decades, had dissolved in dispute and civil strife. The Imam Abdul Rahman bin Saud and his family left Riyadh and went into exile. His son Abdul Aziz went with him, with the hope he would return. They first took refuge with the Bedouin tribes in the empty quarter. Abdul Aziz was just 16 years old. After 7 months in the desert, Abdul Aziz and his family moved to Kuwait, awaiting an opportunity to return to Riyadh. He saw at first hand the forces that would shape the future of Arabia, and he learned about the international politics of the day. To the north, the dominant power was the Ottoman Empire, with its capital in Istanbul. For centuries, the Ottoman sultans had considered themselves caliphs of the faithful Muslim community. As such, they had traditionally played an important role in Arabia. But in the Arabian Gulf, there was another power, that of the British Empire. The British were increasing their influence in the Gulf. This was the situation when Abdul Aziz made his attack on Riyadh. In the mosques of the little towns of the Riyadh district, the word went out that the Al Saud had returned, and with them the fierce commitment to Sharia law and Islamic values. After a drawn battle at Bukhariya, Abdul Aziz set out to attack at Shinana. The Al-Rashid were supported by Turkish troops with artillery, but Abdul Aziz was undeterred.
We, the young ones, ate his lunch. Then he just jumped on his horse and started to strike out at them in all directions. He did not find bin Rashid because he just started the battle and fled. Abdul Aziz struck them on all sides until he was victorious. We, the young ones, ran after him. The scene turned to ashes, and bin Rashid ran away.
The victory had been won, and Abdul Aziz added Qasim to his lands. The Ottomans resorted to negotiations with Abdul Aziz. Turkish garrisons were later withdrawn from Qasim. In Arabia at that time, it was not enough for a ruler to control the towns. Outside in the desert were the Bedouin tribes, leading a nomadic life, preying on the townsfolk and each other. Their raids and counter-raids led to blood feuds and instability. To ensure security, Abdulaziz had to enforce Islamic law between the tribes and the townsfolk. In bringing about security, force was not enough. To settle the tribes, Abdulaziz tried a revolutionary new policy. He enlisted the power of Islam. He sent preachers to the tribes, who urged them to settle down in fixed communities or hijar around the wells and the mosques, made up of different tribes devoted to farming, not war. The religious leaders in Al-Hassa had had close contacts with Riyadh for years. So in 1912, they sent a letter to Abdulaziz inviting him to come to Al-Hassa. Abdulaziz was afraid the British might replace the Turks in Al-Hassa. So, having tricked the tribes who surrounded Al-Hassa to move off to the north, Abdulaziz set off with 900 men. Abdulaziz sent his people ahead, according to his plan to climb the walls of Hafuf and take positions inside the town.
From the side of the western wall of Al-Qut, they prepared a special hole for his entrance. They erected ladders for him in the bottom of the trench, which he climbed and entered through this hole.
He was received by the people of the town, who gave him their allegiance.
And the Ottoman soldiers were scared, and they started firing recklessly in the air. In the morning, the Turkish governor tried to use force.
Eventually, the Turks surrendered. Victory in the east soon followed. Once the ruler of a landlocked state, Abdulaziz now had access to the sea, with all the wealth and contacts of overseas trade. Abdulaziz had taken Al-Hassa at a crucial moment. Britain and the Turks were about to go to war. The British needed to prevent Abdulaziz from further conquest in the Gulf. They signed a treaty with him in 1915, and the next year he went to Basra for talks to avoid being drawn into the war. By the end of the war, Turkish power in the Arab world was destroyed. So the British and their allies imposed a new settlement on the territories they now dominated. They recognized Sharif Hussein in a kingdom of the Hejaz, and with their help, 2 of his sons would become kings of Transjordan and Iraq. Abdulaziz was hemmed in, but he put the enthusiasm and religious devotion of his soldiers to work, continuing the unification of the country. In 1919, Abdulaziz took over the sovereignty in Asir. And then he settled matters with Hail. He laid siege to the town, and then, after 2 months, he tightened his grip. Now Abdul Aziz turned to face a challenge in the west. As ruler of the Hejaz, Sharif Hussein decided to ban people from Nejd from going to Mecca on pilgrimage. A confrontation began. In 1924, Abdul Aziz's impatience with Hussein's ban on the pilgrimage ran out, after the collapse of attempts to come to an agreement. His army marched on the Hejaz. After the capture of Taif, the people of the holy city of Mecca held their breath in fear of their lives. They waited as Abdul Aziz prepared to take the city. He issued a proclamation guaranteeing the safety of the pilgrimage and the people. 3 months later, he entered the holy city as a Haji himself without a fight. Hussein had abdicated and fled before Abdul Aziz's advance. Hussein was succeeded by his son Ali. On the coast, the port of Jeddah held out. Instead of mounting an assault, Abdul Aziz ordered his troops to seal off the town. After a siege lasting a year, Jeddah was handed over. Sharif Ali left the town. Less than a month before, Abdul Aziz's son Muhammad had entered Medina peacefully. Having accepted the surrender, Abdul Aziz returned to Mecca and declared an end to the war. Hejaz had once been part of the first Saudi state. It was now part of his kingdom. In 1930, Jazan too became part of his kingdom. Abdul Aziz had become guardian of the holy places of Islam. He had come a long way from the privations of his desert youth. He had restored his land to the prestige it had lost, becoming the master of Arabia in the process, presiding over the progress of security and religion. Two years on, he would declare his dominions to be a new nation, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. It would be his task to forge the diverse peoples of his kingdom into a united nation. He would harness the new technology of the modern world to ensure their prosperity. At a time when almost all Arabs were suffering under colonial rule, his kingdom would be a bastion of independence. And to the last, he would devote his authority and power to the service of his Muslim faith.